Welcome, everybody. Hello and Happy New Year. My name is Sean Killingsworth. I'm the curator and the host of this series. I'm really glad you can all be here, and you're going to get some amazing poetry today. I've been following all three of today's poets on social media for quite some time, and I'm so impressed with their skills and their talents, and also just their general loveliness as humans on what can be a painful platform. So our three poets are Shiksha, Dheda, Julia Guez, and Matthew E. Henry. So thank you for coming. I've been very much looking forward to this reading. And for audience members, please take a moment to mute yourselves or to, put the cat in the other room so that we don't get any extraneous noises filtering in. We're recording today's session, so it will be up online in the next couple of weeks, depending on how good I am at getting everything going. So let's get started. This month, I'd like to kick off the reading by asking our poets a question. And the question is, it's the beginning of a new year. Do you use conventional time parameters as a tool for goal setting in your work? Or do you have other ways of setting your writing intentions? And if so, what are they? And the reason I ask is that, I've seen a lot of people, particularly in social media, saying like, okay, here's my list of accomplishments from 2022. And here's what I'm going to do in 2023. And I'm going to write for 30 minutes a day. And then I'm going to have 75 poems published. And I'm like, how do you decide that? How do you make that happen? So please reveal all.
Okay, so when I started submitting my work to mags in January of 2021, I thought that wanting 10 acceptances by the end of the year would be a good idea. But because I am a tad obsessive, I submitted so much that by the end of January, I had 10 acceptances. So then I said, okay, by the end of the year, maybe I should aim for 25 acceptances. And then by the end of June, I had 50. So then I said, okay, by the end of the year, I should aim for 100 acceptances. And I actually didn't get that. I got 94 acceptances. And in my mind, that was kind of a failure, even though it was so close. And then I took a step back and I asked myself, what is the point of setting these arbitrary goals? I mean, I was putting a lot of pressure on myself. I wasn't enjoying the process. So then in 2022, I didn't put any goals in terms of submissions or acceptances. And I had about 19 acceptances, which was much less, obviously, but it felt more sustainable. It gave me more time to think about what I really wanted to do with my writing, what direction I wanted it to be in. It gave me more space to do things that inspired me and brought me joy. And that's why even this year, I haven't set any goals. I'm just doing things which I find enjoyable, which going at a pace which I think is sustainable and which is comfortable. So that really allowed me to reframe a lot of my goals. And also, it's kind of silly to say, I want this many acceptances when it's not really up to you as a writer, because it depends on the editors. It depends on a lot of other things. So yeah, that's basically how I view it now. So I don't really follow that time parameter anymore. So yeah.
Interesting. I mean, I think was it difficult to move from this state of sort of overachievement to a much more sort of released ability to
it was because a lot of times I was seeing a lot of people getting published, and I was like, when last have I had a publication? Like, you start also feeling irrelevant, which I think is silly, but I think a lot of writers do feel that if you're not constantly churning out publications or readings, you feel like, what if people forget about me? What if my writing becomes irrelevant? Which is silly, because writing doesn't have an expiration date, but you feel like that as a writer, that people are going to forget me. This is like, I should push myself to do more and more and more when I have this window of opportunity, but it becomes very stressful and you don't enjoy doing what you do, which obviously, considering it's a creative process, is kind of counterproductive to what you want to do. So yeah, it was a big mental shift for me, but I think I'm happy about having done it. So yeah.
That's great. What about you, Matthew or Julia? How do you use time or not, right, to set goals? Do you say, okay, I'm going to write for 30 minutes a day, or I'm gonna go on 4 retreats this year, that kind of thing.
For me, I'm too ADHD to actually set real goals. So I get up in the morning, and just because of the way my work schedule works, I end up getting to work about a half an hour before everybody else. And that's just my time to write and time to write and to read. And so it's sort of a daily, just get something down on paper, revise something that I hated from the day before. And in terms of long-term goals, I sort of always have 2 or 3 chapbooks or full-length projects that I'm working on at a time, whether they're like literally I'm sitting down and working on them, or in the back of my head I have a title and I'm sort of writing poems that are of that same vein. And then I usually throw them together after a month or 3 months or 5 months and send them out, have them all rejected, and then I start the revision process all over again. But yeah, like I always feel that as long as I'm writing every day and at least every other week send something out into the world to fight against that feeling of irrelevance, like whether I'm getting an acceptance or not is not secondary, but it's less than me not putting something out there. So at least if I'm trying to submit, I feel good about myself, and then the rejections come in and I'm like, great, why am I doing this again? Yes. Yeah.
I feel you. Julia, what are your thoughts on this?
I love this question, and I love these last 2 responses. And might steal that from you, Matthew, just in terms of getting to the office a little bit. Like once I'm back, I'm on maternity leave now, but getting there just a little bit before everybody else does, and enjoying that quiet and just that space to myself. The short answer to the question is no, I don't usually set goals like around the new year. Nor do I feel completely comfortable. It might be interesting unpacking why, like on Twitter or elsewhere, like, doing a sort of year in review of achievements, that kind of thing. I don't know why I'm reluctant to do that. But I haven't done it in the past, and maybe I should look into doing it down the line. I don't know, but I guess it's because December and January doesn't mark any pivot point that I recognize in my writing life, even though like, yay, we're going to get a little bit more light in the day. I've got a little bit of time, off of work with my family and friends and that kind of thing. And that's usually really fertile ground for me to do more reading, usually do more writing and so on. But the way I think about it is not in terms of what I want to accomplish in the year, whenever the year begins or ends, but in terms of what I might pull off at the level of the week and the month. So I try to journal every day, but that's me writing as a human being, not necessarily as a poet or a novelist or, critic or anything. And that just keeps me going, but really just as a person, I feel like that's important work. But the level of the week and the month, usually once every weekend, my wife will take our 3 children to the playground or to a museum or what have you, and give me just a few hours to read and to write. And for me, there's a goal met if I'm using that time well, if I'm feeding myself well. Today, I read this really beautiful essay by Eve Kosofsky Sedgwick on paranoid and reparative reading modes. And I just thought, that's every goal met. That's going to fuel so much writing down the line, even if it doesn't today. And then on the level of the month, once or twice a month, just so I'm really giving myself a good block, I do what I don't necessarily recommend anybody else try unless they feel really compelled. And I'll go to bed with the kids, usually 7:30, 8 o'clock at night, so that I can wake up at like 2:30 or 3 in the morning. And the house is entirely quiet, and it's dark as can be, except for this little light I have in my office. And I'll make myself some coffee or some mate or whatever. And I don't have to attune myself to any other needs except the need to just sit down and be with my notebook or with whatever it is I'm reading. And that's just really gorgeous time. And it will ultimately yield a kind of poem that'll evolve into something I'll send out, or that something might get accepted, or something that'll form an important part of a future manuscript, or it won't. But just creating that kind of space has been really nourishing for me. So that's how I think about it. So it's not so much, am I winning a year? It's, am I making the most of the time I can steal away, and write in a given month or given week.
I love that. I don't know if I could physically manage that myself, but I'm going to try. I have kids too, and I can't imagine a moment where there isn't silence, peace and quiet. So that's awesome. Thank you. Wonderful. Thank you all three for answering these questions. I think there's a lot of food for thought here. I'm definitely going to steal some of your ideas and not feel so bad about my own lack of sending things out or making lists. And let's get going. So our first poet up to the mic today is Shiksha Dheda. She's a South African poet of Indian descent. She uses her writing to express her OCD and depression roller coaster ventures, but mostly to avoid working on her master's degree. Sometimes she dabbles in photography, painting, and baking lopsided layer cakes, which I have yet to see a photograph of, so maybe you can put something on social media later today. Her writing has been featured, is either in or forthcoming at Wigleaf, Passages North, Brittle Paper, Doors Ajar, and Epic Press, amongst others. She is a Pushcart-nominated author of Washed Away from Alien Buddha Press, and she rambles at Twitter at Shiksha Writes. You can find her at shikshadata.wixsites.com/writing. And I believe Glenn's going to pop this information into the chat so you can follow her. Yep, there it is. And Shiksha, if you are ready, take it away, please.
Okay. So firstly, I'm very excited about being here. So thank you for having me. And today I've decided I'm going to read some poems from all three of my books so far, because, I mean, why not? So the first book I'll be reading from is Washed Away, which was my debut poetry collection published by Alien Buddha Press in September 2021. There are content warnings for mental illness, namely obsessive compulsive disorder, depression, and a little bit of suicide ideation as well. So, okay, the first poem I'd like to read is called Shore. You keep me at sea. Never let me walk upon the stable earth of man. I wander from land to land, meeting and leaving innumerable people, yet I cannot find the shore that I seek. You prohibit me from throwing down my anchor, from settling down, unlike so many others that have come before me and that will come after I am gone. You give me no direction, no clue, no guidance. Just like the vast mass of endless water are the many intangible pieces of the puzzling questions I have to ask you. But how was I to know that to reach your shore, I would have to drown first? The next poem I'd like to read is called Gone Fishing. So still sticking with a water theme. Gone fishing. I was fishing for answers in the murky waters of depression. All the fish of meaning I extracted looked emaciated and weak. I put them back into the pond, hoping that one day, when I looked for answers again, they would come swimming again. They would come for my bait of questions, being fatter and older, more useful now, more nourishing and filling, sufficient for the void that the hunger of my questions have created. The next one I'm going to read is a very short one, but it's one of my favorite of my own pieces. It's called Old Things. I tried new things, but the carcass of the old things took up too much space. And that's it. That's the poem. Next one is called Sleep Eludes Me, and this one deals with insomnia. So, it is dark once more. Night has fallen, yet my eyes do not relent. Memories flicker like lost fireflies. It used to belong to me, my mad, senseless confidant, a silent friend, singing praise of my strangeness. It danced in every color, resided within and around me, engulfed me, like the sweet lullaby of the restless wind, a wandering traveler, a worthy companion, an old lover, a forgotten dream. I ran after it senselessly, yearning for peace. A colorless noise surrounds me. The thread of sleep and peace has mercilessly been broken. The dark can no longer rock me gently to sleep. Its silence now pierces my calm mind like an intrusive dagger. Dark cannot be trusted. It has conspired with sleeplessness. I wait for light. I just have a few more from Washed Away. And the next one is in every intrusive thought, there is a memory. And this, for me, illustrates the cyclic nature of obsessive compulsive disorder. In every intrusive thought, there is a memory. In every memory, there is a mishap. In every mishap, there is a victim. In every victim, there is a sense of self-blame. In every sense of self-blame, there is a lack of self-confidence. In every lack of self-confidence, there is a questioning of morality. In every questioning of morality, there is a sense of not being the victim. In every sense of not being the victim, there is another mishap. In every mishap, there is a memory. In every memory, there is an intrusive thought. The next one I'd like to read deals a little bit with suicide ideation. It's called, "On some days, I've killed myself at least twice before breakfast." Metaphorically, everyone should kill themselves at least once. It helps dispel the gnawing bugs of suicidal thoughts that feast on my negativity. On some days, I've killed myself at least twice before breakfast. I've killed my vices. Some have died. Some have been promptly reborn. Sometimes I've killed some of my virtues. Virtues sometimes sting just as painfully as vices do, if held in the wrong vessel. I've strangled desires, slowly watching them suffocate till they drown. I've shot down goals, aspirations, weaknesses. I've weeded out some pain. From my ever-growing garden of wild emotion, I've washed myself away almost daily, and I have remolded my personality. Sometimes it grows back just the same. Sometimes it grows back a little misshapen, a little disfigured, a little mutilated. It grows back nonetheless. I'm eternal. I'm insoluble. I can't be burnt with fire, nor drowned with water. I'm immortal. We are immortal. And then I just have one more to read from Washed Away, and that's the last piece in the collection. It's called Dear Childhood. Come back. Take me back to a time where the nudity of my thoughts weren't embraced in the cloak of disturbed age. Come back. Take me back to a time where I didn't tightrope walk on the boundaries of normalcy, breathe within the restraints of my mind. Come back. Take me back to a time where I could weave dreams freely under the shade of trees, thinking that I am unimaginably limitless. And that was my selections from Washed Away. Now I'm going to move on to my chapbook, We Are All Pretty Bizarre, which is a lot more lighthearted, I'd say. It deals with the movies, essentially. So it is freely available to read online. So you should probably read that online. And if you want to be really extra, you can watch the corresponding movie while you read the piece. So it will be like we're watching a movie together, which will be pretty cool, I think. So the first piece I'd like to read is called 7. 7. Lust, gluttony, greed, sloth, wrath, envy, and pride, the deadly sins. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. The years of bad luck when a mirror is shattered. The number of nuptial rounds taken in a Hindu wedding. 7 vows for 7 lifetimes. The number of items that can be stored in our short-term memory. The rumored number of consecutive sneezes required to reach orgasm. The number of Harry Potter books written. Remember how he had to die in that last one to kill his past, to finally move on? Well, I have to kill myself 7 times before I can find peace. Shoot myself, the me that never felt deserving of love. Drown myself, the me that thinks my mental illness is punishment for my existence. Strangle myself, the me that believes that true happiness can only be acquired to suffering, that the right to be happy must somehow be earned. Burn myself, the me looking for acceptance and validation. Cut myself, the me that thinks self-care equals selfishness. Starve myself, the me that doesn't mind toxicity. And poison myself, the me that can't forgive me. The next one I'm going to read is based on The Truman Show. It's called All the Faces Are You, or Self-Portrait as Truman. I hear your laugh amid the roaring crowds beyond her fake smile. She doesn't smile like you. Her advertisement Colgate smile, her perfectly made up face, the way she looks directly into the camera and laughs at me, the way she holds me strategically, almost mechanical, almost as though I were her colleague. None of it makes sense, yet somehow all of it makes sense. How dad died at sea all those years ago, how I've had the same best friend since I was born, how my phobia of leaving the island has kept me here, trapped with her. I feel like I'm losing my mind. I thought a beggar on the street was my dead dad. I thought I saw cameras in an elevator. I thought I could leave this darn place. I thought I could fabricate you from smaller pieces of other women, almost as though piecing a portrait together could allow me to piece you back into my life. Like that day at the beach. Like that day I thought I could love someone. The day I thought I could be loved, truly. And then the last one, I've never really read before, but someone told me it could work as a good spoken word piece. So it's called Thoughts I Have While Watching The Conjuring. Oh, we're starting with the creepy doll. Why? To be honest, those college students were pretty kind to keep Annabelle in their home. And that was how she repaid them? Ugh, demon dolls. Anyhow, what a large, lovely, secluded home. The perfect place for haunting. They have 5 daughters and a dog. How do they afford food and this mansion? Oh, wait, that's probably why the house is affordable. The dog doesn't want to enter the house. Oh, that's always a good indicator of haunted things. Leave immediately. Let's play hide and clap. Oh, you think that's a good idea? Even in a non-haunted house, that is not a good game to play. Oh, the dog is literally dead the freaking next day. Leave immediately. I am no longer emotionally invested in this movie. Sadie is dead, and so are my hopes and dreams. This entire family of 7 can die. I don't care anymore. Cindy sleepwalks and bangs her head repeatedly into a wall. Maybe they need a therapist and not a demonologist. So far, despite the creepy ambience, there are no jump scares. And there it is. Dumb old woman sitting on top of the dumb old cupboard. Gosh, she's hideous. Also, now the paranormal forces are not hiding anymore. They're openly attacking the family. Cool, cool. Sounds like a job for the Warrens. According to Psychic Lorraine, the forces have now latched onto the family, and leaving the residence won't help much. Overly attached forces much. Forces will literally attach to a poor family for decades rather than go to therapy. Okay, so there was a Satan worshipper that sacrificed her baby and then hung herself. Totally dramatic, even for the medieval times, to be honest. Ew, did Bathsheba just spit blood into that woman's mouth? This is the worst part of the movie, actually, except for the dog dying, of course. I'm guessing this means that the mother is now possessed. So wait, can spirits transfer bodily fluids like blood and things like sperm? So can a spirit impregnate a human or vice versa? Is this a conundrum that Stephanie Meyer needs to figure out for us? So when Edward sits on people's cupboards and bites them, then it's romance. But when an old lady does it, it's horror. Okay, patriarchy much. So anyhow, after weird happenings like seeing the ghosts of other possessed souls, wait, is this a thing? Can a soul be possessed? Like in this instance, Bathsheba convinced people to kill themselves and other people, mostly their own children. So does she still control their souls after they die? Is there a hierarchy of souls? Oh no, this is a new form of anxiety now. Will I get bullied after I die? Great. So after a series of strange occurrences, demonologists Ed and Lorraine Warren managed to save this unfortunate family and rid them of these paranormal forces. The strange part for me, though, was how Bathsheba could communicate with Annabelle, who was in a completely different suburb, using only the network technology of twin necklaces. How cool is that? Was it the metals that were used? Do demons and ghosts have Wi-Fi? Do they use cell phones? Do they watch porn? So many questions. And that concludes my section from We Are All Pretty Bizarre. So I hope you enjoyed that. You could please check out that chapbook. I really enjoyed writing it. And then finally, I'm going to read from The Tragedy of Touch, which is my most recent chapbook, which was published with Famidan Publishing and Co. And I'll start reading with Stardust. Stardust. I conjured you up from stardust, whispered you into existence from lullabies, devoured galaxies, tasted skies, left them on your lips, birthed universes on your tongue, entangled supernovas in the spaces between your fingers, the spaces between what's left unsaid, words, monologues of desires, of pain, of pleasure. Smothered and wrapped in uneven gasps, I touched you, kissed your cheeks, your fingertips, your navel, and you became a god, my creation, worshipping at the altar of my skin, tracing scriptures on my back, engraving holy verses on the insides of my thighs, kisses dripping like wax from worship candles, dripping, 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 on my forehead, on my cheeks, between my lips, between my legs. I conjured you up from stardust, created you to devour you, every edge, every cliff, a little closer, a little further, closer, further, a little closer, a little further, creating, destroying, between gasps, between moans, traversing lifetimes within seconds. And then my final piece is the titular poem. That word gets me every time. I'm very mature, I swear. From The Tragedy of Touch. The Tragedy of Touch. We traveled billions of years, stardust, hydrogen, helium, carbon, to inhabit this bone cage, this flesh chamber on a rotating globe, to never be able to truly embrace, to really hold, to caress. Elements ricocheting through lifetimes of innumerable stars, supernovas. I hug you, hold you, wrap my feet across your ankles, entangle our fingers in the spaces between what is left unsaid. I'm still alone, isolated in an unfathomably tiny space, created by your electrons, repelling my own, repelling me. I'll always just be hovering over everything that I love. Aloof, alone. And that concludes my section. I hope I have warmed the stage up for the two poets who I'm very excited to listen to. So thank you for listening.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was just wonderful, Shiksha. What fun. I definitely want you to review every movie that I would like to see before I see it in that way. It'll help me know what to watch. All righty. Well, our very next poet is Julia Guez. Julia is a writer and translator based in Queens in New York. The Certain Body is her second collection of poetry, which was written while she was recovering from COVID in the spring of 2020. For her poetry, fiction, and translations, she's been awarded the Discovery Boston Review Prize, a Fulbright Fellowship, and the John Frederick Nims Memorial Prize in Translation, as well as a translation fellowship from the NEA. She's definitely not an underachiever. For the last decade, Guez has worked with Teach for America in New York. She's currently the Senior Managing Director of Design and Implementation there. She teaches creative writing at NYU and Rutgers. I have attended both of those schools. So you can find more of her work online at juliaguez.net. And if you're so inclined, you can buy all of her books, and I highly recommend that you do, from Four-Way Books, from bookshop.org, or your local bookstore. Julia, if you are ready, the spotlight is on you.
Thank you so much for having me. It is so good to be here. This is such a cool series, two very cool poets that I get to spend my Sunday with. And thank you to everybody who's sharing yourselves with us on your Sunday. Hoping this warms you up, fills you up, makes you very glad to be here and hopeful to come to the next reading next month on the second Sunday. I'm reading from this book, which Four-Way put out a few months ago, and which the artist Julie Marie Tu allowed us to use some of her work for the cover for. And like the bio says, if you can, get it from anywhere but Amazon. If you get it from Amazon too, the fact that you're buying poetry, it all makes me very happy and very honored that you'd buy mine. But if you can buy it directly from a bookstore or a press, you get bonus points, karmically speaking. I'll begin at the beginning and say that this is a poem that began in 2019, August of 2019, but didn't figure itself out, didn't click into place or find its way until the 5th revision of the manuscript before I had to hand it to my press. And it's called Meditation at Callicoon. And here we are. More and more night pretends it isn't spring. What to make of the daffodils then? Hyacinth here and there, wind and rain. So many birds. Of course, they won't stay long. None of this will. Not the night, the cold, the city full of swallows. Not the bridges and rivers, not the sea. No God born of the sea foam. Not even mothers and sons. This would be unbearable without. That poem situates itself in upstate New York, but I hope you feel the city so present in it, as strange as it's become in COVID, as quiet, as many birds as it's let out or let sing for us to hear them. Let me read now. I'm passing by a poem called As We Consider Another Child. But if you hear an infant crying, you know where we landed with that thinking. Here's the next poem, and it's dedicated to a poet no longer with us. We lost her last year, named Camilla Aisha Moon, who Four-Way Books also put out, and she's a gorgeous poet. So this is for her, and it's called If Indeed I Am Ill. Tell me all about London. The weather there in spring, outside the walls of the Great Hall. These things matter less to me than the sound of your summery shadows cast on the watery surfaces of my mind by invisible fingers whose energy is everything, as you know. These sonatas, these scores, tell me, what of them will last when everything falls away? And a short one called Still Life with SARS-CoV-2. And then what? And then what? What then? I'm skipping over a poem that I love reading, mostly on the page, but struggle to bring to readings themselves because I read it aloud and can't quite represent to folks when I'm plagiarizing Hannah Sullivan and when I'm not. It's like sort of a dialogue, and on the page I indent her gorgeous work, which I was in like constant dialogue with when I was sick in bed and reading, recovering, so on. But I just feel like you wouldn't know which is her and which is me, and it doesn't do her any good. So I'll move into the middle section of the book, which takes its title from a line out of Susan Sontag's book, Illness as Metaphor. And in it, she says, illness is, she didn't claim this while she was writing the book, but indeed she was struggling with illness herself, a cancer that would ultimately go into remission, but come back, I think, a couple of times and ultimately cut short her life. But I share that backstory so that she knew a little bit about what she was talking about, as distant and as sort of academic as she was sometimes in writing through the subject. She said, illness is the night side of life, a more onerous citizenship. Well, COVID sort of brought that sense certainly to the top of my mind, and I wrote a 5-part poem loosely structured after Ash Wednesday, Maundy Thursday, Good Friday, Saturday Vigil, and Easter Sunday services. I won't read all of it because it's long and because I want you to buy this book, but not from Amazon. But I do want to read a few of the sections, including one that includes a fever dream, because why not? First one is Wednesday. So many Cassandras sing each to each. What we, gathering, cannot yet sense may as well be Greek. For the record, I do not know Greek. Let there be a record. Let the record show my Greeklessness would matter greatly at several points, one or two in particular. May have been windwarding, the song I mean, all those xylophones. Windwarding now to know, the music was both knowable and known then. When I was standing next to you in the last pew, with our coats still on because it was cold, and we would still have been hurrying to certain offices after. I will think of you often, performing these frail rites to bend the centrifugal back sun. I am afraid this will be one convalescence after another. Lilacs on every sill, profusely sad knowing they too spread and spread, not unlike bells. Ever widening rings of all kinds and the terrible swing of the censer. Sirens on the other side of this psalm whose linens are loud with cries and are become our Italy's. This next section is called Thursday, and it models itself off of the Maundy Thursday service, which for Episcopalians or anybody else joining them for this kind of service might be the sexiest church service in the entire calendar. And I say that because it wouldn't be uncommon in certain parishes to wash somebody else's feet or have them wash yours. Now, some people in this room probably got very grossed out thinking about that, but I have to say, if you close your eyes, you don't think about it over much. Okay, that's one. It's really gorgeous. So anyhow, there were no church services going on in the spring of 2020 in the city of New York, and they wouldn't resume actually for quite a long time. But in sort of working with that image, here's what I came up with. Thursday. I was made American. You must consider this wanting badly to be washed clean in that light. Consider also the fever dream, in my case, fractals, which may or may not belong to otters who appear to be holding hands. I see the pair, so much dun-colored fur folding in on itself. I see the dark river. Fortunately, there is also a shower scene. I thank God for this part of the dream, the smell of that soap, and all the seminarians there with me and my wife. In the dim light of this painterly onsen, glistening bodies, one is pale, but not at all sickly. Pearlescent then, yes, and lissom, lithe. Breasts not unlike a murmuration of birds. What they fever after, we fever after, in tight swaths circling the warmest water. Laving feet, fascia, calves, the small of so many backs, homily of so many hands, lathering once bleeding eidolons. Every single scar, a story whose ending is clearly not one, for here we are, gently washing, washed. And they might wash your feet. You will not get a shower scene. I don't want anybody to be disappointed. In those last two sections, I borrowed from Thomas Merton. I borrowed from Lucy Brock-Broido. And in this third section of this 5-part poem, I borrow from the poet Claudia Rankine. Rankine, Dylan Thomas, maybe that's it. There are 3 words per line here. I don't think it's usually impoverishing to hear a poem read as opposed to reading one. In fact, I think you can gain a lot more than you can usually by just sitting alone with a book sometimes. But for some reason, it felt important that that's how it was set up. Friday. How to mourn, how many the stations of the breath have taken. After the first death, there is no other, but the requiem is endless. Endless the sequelae whose ever-widening rings widen around the names of the dead, swallowing those who survive them. Exactly why we survive and can look back with furrowed brow is beyond me. It is not something to know. On this day, ministers enter in silence. No one there. The force of that, and also the very fact that they go on with this ritual calling for some relief from beyond the desolating sound of songbirds going on in the cemetery, the same way they do here. Saturday. Thank you so much. In this one, there's a lot of Wallace Stevens brought forward, and then just a little bit of Guez. And just so you know, I I note every single reference in the book, if it's a conscious one. If there's an unconscious one, obviously that's not there to note, but I think my editor would have caught that. And so the notes section might be I don't know, as beautiful, let's say, as the book itself, in some of the lines that I situate these lines, these phrases that I've stolen. But this is the last of the four, the fourth part, the last of the 5-part poem that I'll read, and it's called Saturday. Between that disgust and this one, a vigil. The dark has never been final. And we'll go into the realm of odes now. I feel like this book is heavy with elegy, and that's appropriate to the moment of its making, but it's not without its tendernesses and its grace and its gratitudes and its sense of what there is to celebrate. God, there's a lot. Let's go to ode, and then we'll read 2 birthday poems. Everybody doing well? Do you need like a sip of whiskey or tea? No, you're good. Okay, got to move your bodies. You're feeling all right. You're not going to get too tight. I feel like we've been on Zoom for the last 3 years, and I don't want to get that neck and shoulders feeling when we're reading poetry on it. This is ode. The leech and the lacrimal are a no-go now. We must devise our own cures. By the pew, a booth. Do not stop there. There may very well be another garden beyond the garden in the courtyard, and at some point high walls. Do not let them deter you, though. They're only ornamental. In one of these gardens, you'll find a set of keys by the arbor not far from a pond filled with coins. You will think to yourself, this is it. It isn't. I will be waiting on the very next lawn, with a hand of bananas on a blanket, some smart water sandwiches, and a sign there to say, you are closer than you think. Okay, 2 birthday poems, and then we'll close. I feel like I should read Still Life with Post-Acute Sequelae of SARS-CoV-2, by the way. Different title, which refers to sort of the long haul of COVID, different than COVID itself, but the same poem. And then what? And then what? What then? The experience of COVID and of all that sort of came to the surface for us as Americans, but all around the world, I feel like. And as somebody whose father was born from Tunisia, but lived a good amount of his life in France. I've got family all over. And this seemed to have some really salient themes this moment that 2020 cracked open for us. And one was that we would be grateful to make it to our birthdays, those feeling like even more radical achievements than they were feeling like before. And this is when I began celebrating half birthdays and Wednesdays, and basically every day that I woke up and felt good, like I'd be given some good hours and some productive hours and some health and some strength. And and all of those good things that I think we know not to take for granted in the same ways. So this one's called On the Occasion of My Half Birthday. And if I ever walk into a dispensary and they ask me what I'm looking for, I'm going to give them this poem and say, can we do this? See what they hand me. Time out in the window box. Wildness and splay of what has always survived winter here, fasting only to reemerge, greener in the spring. All I want is the sun on my face. At the park where I take our children to play, I want my whole body to feel light pouring through the leaves on massive branches with a force that can finally be honest about its own ambition to draw the citrus and myrrh out of this or any other afternoon, knowing weeks of them, knowing months and years disappear like so many simians. Okay. Thank you for the snaps and the smiles and for being here. A special thank you to somebody who's not my blood relative, but she has been claimed. She has been chosen by me such that she's become my aunt by marriage to my sweet wife, Elizabeth Ballard, and her name is Rule Brand, and she's here joining in from Portland. I'll close with a poem called 40, written for my birthday. It felt sort of like an epic birthday. And it's 10 lines, 4 words per line, and it zeroes in on an image that came to me the first time I was strong enough, good enough to go traveling after our spring spent in New York. And it was my birthday month, birthday week and day, October in Costa Rica. And I was sitting out on this balcony and it was just so relaxed. People were so not traumatized. It was a very different order, a very different feeling. Let's say, it's not to say that Costa Rica itself was not traumatized by what happened. It's just to say that particular moment, that particular space felt very far away from what we'd been in. And I found myself looking up at this massive tree that had weathered hundreds of years worth of things, COVID included, and it began to drop its flowers from the sky. And I thought, I'm gonna write this down. I'm gonna see what I can do with this. This is just really monumental. So here it is. All the purple flowers, the way they fall, white and purple falling. See how they turn their skirts, turning their white and purple skirts, so that at least they fall slowly, make no sound, beginning soon to yellow, then brown. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Julia. What a treat. I just love your poems so much. And I love that you incorporate the work of so many other poets. I think that's one of the things that I think can be so illuminating, right? It gives us a little window into what you're thinking and who you're reading and what's meaningful to you. So I love knowing all of that stuff. So I think, as you said, that the notes are just as interesting and important and beautiful as the book itself. So thank you for sharing with us. Okay, we are up to our very last poet of the day. Our next reader is Matthew E. Henry. He is the author of The Colored Page from Sundress Publications, Teaching While Black from Main Street Rag, and Dust and Ashes from California's Press. I think I said that right. He's editor-in-chief of the Weight Journal and an associate poetry editor at Pigeonholes. His poetry appears in the Florida Review, Massachusetts Review, Ninth Letter, Plowshares, Poetry East, Shenandoah, and Solstice. And MEH is it MEH or meh? That's actually something I should have asked you earlier because I see the meh everywhere and it kind of cracks me up.
Both. It's both.
Okay, awesome. So he is an educator who received his MFA, which really doesn't lend itself to a word, yet continued to spend money he didn't have, completing an MA in theology and a PhD in education. He writes about education, race, religion, and burning oppressive systems to the ground at mehpoeting.com. So Matthew, please, the spotlight is on you.
Hello, everyone. It's hard going last because Shiksha and Julia just killed it. And I'm like, all right, so I get to depress everybody at the end. Just a little background. I'll be reading from The Colored Page, which is a semi-autobiographical journey of young Black guy who is now an old Black guy, being what one of my students referred to as a raisin in a bowl of milk. Busing didn't end in the 60s and the 70s. And so I was a part of what is known as the METCO program, which is still in Massachusetts, which is busing Black kids largely from the inner city into the suburbs. And so I now work about 2 miles from where I went to elementary school. And am the only Black teacher, no, one of 2 Black teachers in the district, where I was one of very few Black kids in the district previously. So this will be spanning a lot of my career, and I'll start with classical conditioning. We sit in our newly minted desks, Melvin, Matthew, and Matt. Only 3 years from retirement, she finds our names difficult to distinguish. We bear no family resemblance. 1 is white, 2 are Black. When a question is asked and more than one of our hands are raised, we're never sure which one she wants, unless she's smiling. My 3rd grade teacher. My 3rd grade teacher explained skin, the undercurrents of blood, and how my face lacked the ability to bruise or blush. I tried to show her a patch darker than the rest. She nodded, explained it was harder to see on my skin. I think a lot about that poem because I remember when the incident happened, in 3rd grade, and she called everybody up to like, show your bruises. And, I showed my bruise and she's like, oh, you can't bruise. My ADHD behind assumed that I just wasn't paying attention and I missed something in the lesson. So then I re-explained, like, I fell down, got an owie, capillaries under the skin burst. And she said, it's harder to see on your skin. And it wasn't until I was a professor of education and was sharing this story to my undergraduates and graduate students that it dawned on me how many, not just Black students, how many students had she taught that Black kids don't bruise? Like, many of us might still think that if we swallow a piece of gum, it stays on our stomach for 7 years until someone tells us, no, that's not true. Like, how many people in the world believe Black people don't bruise, as if our bodies work differently? Similarly, it came up in my class because I was talking about how the curriculum that we teach sometimes, I'm a high school teacher now, sometimes our curriculum is whitewashed. We're not assuming that the kids in front of us are any other race other than white. And some lessons that we are taught reinforce that. Self-evident. As a kid from Boston, the Revolutionary War was my favorite subject in 4th grade. A tea party I could respect. Class trips vainly searching for musket balls in Lexington treetops. Reading of decapitations by cannonball on Breed's Hill. Even the sites in Southie, unsafe for me to visit, were a source of tribal pride, like rooting for the Patriots. We were told to don our colonial imagination caps and tell our story of emancipation from the British. Where would we be? The Old South Meeting House? The Old North Church? What would we see as we rose to American greatness? Our teachers should hear freedom ringing in the streets through our words. I dropped my head to begin, oversized pencil in hand, until I remembered. Seeing my inaction, she crouched and began to re-explain. I patiently waited for her to finish, eyes on her lips, then asked if she wanted me to pretend to be white, or to picture myself for sale on the steps of Faneuil Hall, or stacked in one half of the harbor ships heading to and from the West Indies, explaining my parents' patois. After the vocal static, the hems and haws of white noise, she suggested Crispus Attucks, the hometown boy, the Black hero of the Boston Massacre. My siblings had taught me the 1-drop rule and when to nod my head politely. So I pretended he was not half Wampanoag, that Framingham was not his master's home, and imagined myself the first unarmed Black man shot on these urban streets. Fast forwarding to high school, and I have to always say that this is a true story. I actually read I read this at a poetry reading not long ago, and there were some friends of mine from high school who were like a part of the Zoom call, and I was like, you can't name names. You know the people involved. 12 Minutes a Slave. We held a slave auction in class today. Probably not a state-sanctioned component of AP US history, but Mr. S made a block out of the front row desks, cornered it off with backwards-facing chairs. He shameforced Tony Miller above us, introduced him as item number 5. He prepared a catalog, a one-sided sepia sheet with Tony's description and a starting price. Before the bidding, Mr. S made Tony turn in perfect circles so we could all see what we were getting. Made him show his gums and teeth, roll up his sleeves and flex, lift an Oxford unabridged over his head for as long as he could and strain. We were encouraged to holler, not yell, intrusive questions about Tony's pedigree and prior owners, to discuss if he was better suited for house or field, to speculate about breeding options. After Tony climbed down, unable to meet our eyes or the oppressive silence, I was almost ashamed that a white teacher treating one of his own like this made my brown skin rattle with the joy of falling chains. He had tenure. He could get away with pretty much whatever he wanted to. Western Heritage. She asked, what grade were you in when you had your first Black teacher? Suddenly, I'm sprinting down sepia halls through pastel classroom doors, tracing the corners of my mind, scanning from wall to see who stands in front of the black, then green, then whiteboard, across 40 years, 5 towns and disciplines, the real spin, crayons to pencils to pens to keyboard, from poetry to prose and back, until I see him. Teaching history, my freshman year of college, a decade before I stood in the same spot. The title's Western Heritage. That was the name of the class that I had freshman year. And that final line, a decade before I stood in the same spot, that's both literal and figurative. I ended up teaching at my alma mater and standing in that exact same spot, and became the first Black teacher or professor that a lot of my students had. I read this at my book launch, which I expected 20 people to show up for the book launch. About 60 showed up. 30 of them were former students of mine, both from the college level and some who I taught at the school that I'm currently at. And so I'm like crying hysterically. But I read that poem, and because I am insane, said, raise your hand if I was the first Black teacher you had. And most of them raised their hand. And, you know, there's school board members there and administration. I'm like, oh, you should probably notice that some of them have graduated. Most of them have graduated. And I was the only Black teacher they ever had. Huh. We don't have a diversity problem. No, not at all. No. I still have a job somehow. Jumping ahead into my teaching career, I'll read the title twice because it's a mouthful. An open letter to the secretary who asked how I haven't taken to drink or Schedule I narcotics like so many of our colleagues. An open letter to the secretary who asked how I haven't taken to drink or Schedule I narcotics like so many of our colleagues. My inward rolling eyes consider the 26 administrators in 7 years, including the principal who put a pregnant woman in a headlock, who said, I gave the Hispanics a soccer ball, what more do they want? Another arrested for battering his wife. The week it took for IT to realize our new email said pubic school. The budget cuts and bomb threats, fire drills, tornado drills, chemical spill drills, the porn accident in physics class, the students discussing which of us would take a bullet with their names on it, later seen in handcuffs, cages, caskets, the cancers and car crashes, the substitute who dropped her panties and shat on the wheelchair ramp inside the library, the teacher caught shirtless with a 14-year-old in her car, the sleepless nights holding secrets like hands after abortions, miscarriages, and becoming a godfather. I don't know how to answer, save showing you a blank page and a pen filled with blood. I spent a lot of time just trying to take care of my kids and keep them in one piece. This poem Every line is a trigger warning for the various things that my high school students have gone through, and every single line is based off of an actual conversation with one of my kids. And I still have a job because I didn't actually read it at back to school night. That was one of the good things that COVID brought, was me not reading this out loud. An open letter for back to school night. Your child was sexually assaulted at a party, almost. A friend intervened as sober hands fumbled against an impaired zipper. Your child is in love with sharp edges. Clothespins, safety razors, and X-Acto knives wait red-spotted under the bed, but your maid has yet to notice. Your child hasn't eaten solid foods in 3 weeks, has slit both wrists in frenetic dreams, takes whatever colored pills are closest to hand, drinks until feelings can't be felt. Your child found your Tinder profile, your stash, the photos, the manila envelope containing the truth. Your child overheard you that night. Here's what you really mean, even though you're too afraid to admit it. Your child has told me these things because you're too busy posting shit about other parents on Facebook, and they don't want to be a distraction. I did read that one at the book launch. Many of the kids involved in that poem were in the room, and they know they were fine with it. Some of their parents were also in the room. They were less enthusiastic about this poem for some reason. When asked why all lives don't matter. After a deep breath, I attempted to explain. My aunt had breast cancer. Despite a healthy dose of science and scripture, prayers and prescriptions, the shadow never dimmed. We celebrated her life, mourned the hole her grave dug in ours. We lauded her loving kindness, questioned the natural shocks flesh is heir to, why this disease would claim a wife, a coworker, a friend, an aunt. At the repast, heads turned to the future, saving other sons and daughters, ourselves. A collection was taken to fund breast cancer research. A medical scholarship for oncology study discussed. A proposal for new. From the back of the church hall, a woman no one recognized screamed, "What about ovarian cancer and prostate cancer? Why aren't you talking about those? All cancers matter." Most of my students nodded into the ensuing silence, but some blank stares in my job description doomed me to be more didactic, to explain appropriate time, place, and manner, intent versus impact, the guilt and shame required to derail communal grief and hijack a narrative to make oneself more comfortable. I explained the human duty to choose. Enter the room willing to bear bodies on your shoulders, or, arms empty, leave and silently stand outside. I said, replace cancer with lives, and waited. I'll read 2 more poems. This one employs use of the N-word. I can't see whose cameras are not on, but I'm going to assume for the moment that I'm the only person who can use the word in this group and not catch those hands, as my kids say. And I've been told that I need to give a trigger warning because some folks are highly offended by the word, which I understand. And at the same time, I always ask if people are more offended by the use of the word than the context in which it's being used in this poem. There's some soul searching that might need to be done, but you'll understand. An open letter to the white girls caught chanting nigger on Snapchat again. How privileged you are. The social stigma of being a racist lingers for only a week. That white woman tears wash away the stench that should follow the shit still stuck to the roof of your mouth, but it's not your fault. You don't know that words have meanings or histories, and it is so unfair that we get to say it. This reverse racism, which makes you too uncomfortable to sing our songs outside of monochromatic parties fueled by Sour Dab and White Claw, but you weren't singing. Your coven chanted your word of the night as if to summon Jim Crow and Judge Lynch from their light slumber. It's our fault you never had the ovicular fortitude to laugh slur in front of we, who must now endure an apology as honest as your hair compared to its roots. And as your parents rush to protect your fragile backs from the whips and lash of eyes as you pass through the halls, the right whispers calling you exactly what you are, your former teacher has only one question, avoided by administration, cautioned by legal counsel. Which nigger replaced my name? Replaced Chris and Latoya's, Hannah and Timothy's, Michael and Anthony's, Naoma and Ashanti's, Shania and Ashley's. The names at the end there are the class members, the senior class members of the young ladies in question, as well as the only other Black person who was working in the building at the time, who has since left. I'm alone, and the principal. But they felt very emboldened to say what they said, and then on Monday morning, "We're so sorry. We didn't know. We were high." I do have a poem in here entitled "An Open Letter to Those Wondering Why I've Called This the Most Racist Place I've Ever Worked." I'm not going to read that one. I will close with the last poem in the collection entitled "An Open Letter to My Well-Intentioned White Educators, Past, Present, and Future." Future because, I like being in debt. I'll go back to school at some point. Thank you for always seeing me as one of the good ones. A safe bet for your efforts. A burden worth lifting. Your attempts to connect and encourage, like the educators whose movies were mocked in the faculty lounge, didn't go unnoticed. But I never wanted to be the first Black president, or the second. I wasn't interested in attending Harvard or those special summer programs, sure to broaden my horizons. There's a reason I grew tired of Crispus Attucks, George Washington Carver, and the Reverend Dr. King being your only assignment suggestions. Why I read Othello while the rest suffered through Salinger's unreliable narration. Why I later asked if you knew Sojourner Truth, Lucille Clifton, Octavia Butler, the other dead having as much to offer. It's why my recital piece was Sir Duke instead of Chopin. I know how I looked at times, the baggy pants, the bandana, the toothpick, the code switching which made you more uncomfortable than my racially charged questions. But I can be loud without being angry, just like everyone else. Can fail without being a reflection of all who share my shade, at least in theory. Don't worry, at the time of this writing, I am not dead or in prison. 5 diplomas and decades of my own students say I turned out all right. Feel free to take your share of the credit, but understand your dreams weren't in color, and I didn't need saving. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Matthew. What a great day. I'm trying to remember the quote. I think it was June Jordan who said it's the job of the poet to make people uncomfortable. So I feel like you guys have succeeded in your jobs today. Thank you for that. God, what a great reading. All 3 of you. I'm so grateful to you for coming. I'm so grateful to you for sharing your work. I'm so honored and thrilled that you spent your day with me. And that you spent your day with all of us. So once again, thank you from Second Sunday Readings from me. And thank you to everyone in the audience for coming. Thanks again for coming. Thanks again for reading. And I hope you all have a lovely rest of your evening.